Laura's phone was warm from her hand when she set it on the kitchen island and asked me to just check if the listing agent replied. Ordinary request. Ordinary Saturday. The kind where the snow outside Madison turned gray at the edges and the house smelled like lemon cleaner because she'd been in one of her reset the weekend moods. I picked it up without thinking. Same passcode as always, our wedding date. My thumb knew it like muscle memory. The screen was already open to her email. Nothing from the agent. I was about to set the phone back down when a notification slid across the top, smooth and bright like it belonged to someone else's life. Venmo. Payment completed. $60. No name I recognized. No note. Just that clean little confirmation, like the world had done something simple and efficient. For a second I stared at it the way you stare at a misread road sign, expecting your brain to correct itself. $60 wasn't a crisis. It wasn't even a dinner out. But the timing hit me wrong. Right then, in our kitchen, with her humming softly in the laundry room like nothing was out of place. My fingers didn't move. I didn't tap it. I didn't open anything. I just held the phone and felt the smallest shift inside my chest, like a floorboard giving way under a rug. She walked back in, carrying folded towels against her hip, and smiled at me like she always did, quick, casual, confident. "Any update?" she asked. I looked at her face and realized I didn't know what I was looking at anymore. "Not yet," I said, and set the phone down exactly where she left it. In that moment, I still didn't know what had broken. I only knew the life I thought I knew no longer existed. Before that afternoon, our life in Madison ran on a kind of dependable clockwork. I got up at 5:45, same alarm tone, same first look out the bedroom window to see what the sky was doing. In winter it was usually a flag gray, the kind that makes the streetlights feel permanent. I'd make coffee, pack my lunch without thinking about it, and drive to the office while the city was still half asleep. I'm an engineer. Routine isn't something I tolerate, it's something I build. My days were measurements and margins, meetings and deadlines, a steady stream of problems that could be solved if you stayed calm and kept your notes clean. I liked that about my work. The truth was always in the numbers. If something didn't fit, you didn't argue with it. You found out why. Laura's world was different. Real estate runs on people, not tolerances. Her schedule moved with clients, showings after dinner, open houses on weekends, networking events where she'd wear heels and talk too brightly about market energy. She knew everyone, or she knew how to make it feel that way. I used to watch her work a room and think, that's a skill I don't have. She had the Milwaukee trips occasionally, nothing dramatic, just a day of meetings, sometimes an overnight if she had 2 closings lined up. She'd send pictures from hotel lobbies or a quick shot of a latte with a caption like "long day." She wasn't secretive about it. If anything, she was almost casual, like she didn't need to convince me. And I didn't ask to be convinced. We had joint accounts, shared savings, one of those neat little budgeting spreadsheets I updated on Sundays, mostly because I liked seeing everything line up. I never combed through her spending. If a Target run was bigger than usual, I assumed she bought something for the house. If she expensed dinners, I assumed it was with clients. Real estate is like that. Relationships are part of the job. Trust, for us, wasn't a conversation. It was just the air. We used the same passcode on our phones, our wedding date, like a private joke that never got old. It was the sort of small symbol couples talk about when they're trying to describe stability. We don't even lock our phones, people would say, like it was proof of something. And honestly, it felt like proof. Our evenings were normal. We cooked. We watched the same shows in the same spots on the couch. She'd lean her feet against my leg when she was tired. I'd rub her ankle without thinking. On Fridays, we'd split a bottle of wine and talk about listings and my projects and whether we should finally replace the old dishwasher that made a noise like a dying lawnmower. If there were cracks, they didn't announce themselves. They didn't come with shouting or slammed doors or unexplained disappearances. They came, if they were there at all, in the form of little delays I wrote off as work. A late text. Sorry, this ran long. A tired smile when she came in after I'd already started cleaning up dinner. I assumed adulthood was mostly that. 2 people doing their best, sometimes missing each other by a few hours, always coming back to the same home. Looking back, that's what makes that Venmo notification feel so sharp in my memory. It didn't arrive in the middle of chaos. It arrived in the middle of a life that, on the surface, made perfect sense. I didn't say anything to her after that. Not that night. Not the next morning. I went through Sunday the way I always did, making coffee, answering a few work emails, nodding at her comments about an upcoming open house like nothing had changed. Outwardly, the rhythm stayed intact. Inside, something had gone quiet. Late that night, after she fell asleep, I picked up my own phone and opened Venmo. I hadn't used it much beyond splitting dinners with friends. I searched her username. It took less than a second to find her profile. That surprised me more than it should have. I tapped it and scrolled. The payments were there. Not dozens. Not dramatic. Just enough to form a shape. $60. 75. 40. Some incoming. Some outgoing. A few usernames I didn't recognize. No notes. Clean transactions, spaced out like they didn't want attention. I didn't tell myself a story about it. I didn't try to explain it away. I just kept looking. From Venmo, I went to our bank app. Same shared login I'd had for years. I filtered by date, then by merchant. Hotels appeared quietly, mixed in with grocery stores and utilities. Nothing extravagant. Mid-range chains. Always one night. Always billed on weekdays. Late-night restaurants followed the same pattern. Places that stayed open past 10. Gas stations I didn't recognize, clustered after midnight. The dates lined up without effort. The same evenings she texted that a showing ran long. The same nights she came home with her heels in her hand and said traffic was terrible. What surprised me wasn't the evidence. It was how little emotion it carried. I felt no rush of anger, no urge to wake her up and demand an explanation. The engineer part of me took over, the part that had spent years learning to separate noise from signal. Data didn't accuse. It didn't defend. It simply existed. I stopped asking myself what it meant. Meaning implied interpretation, and interpretation implied hope. Instead, I treated it like any other system that had begun to fail. You don't argue with a fracture. You trace it. You document where it starts and where it spreads. Over the next few days, I checked quietly. Not obsessively. Just enough to confirm that what I'd seen wasn't a fluke. More small charges appeared. More late timestamps. Always ordinary. Always plausible on their own. I realized then that I wasn't searching for proof anymore. Proof suggests a future conversation. What I was doing felt different. I was orienting myself. Adjusting to a new understanding of the terrain. Somewhere in that process, without ceremony or decision, the question shifted. It stopped being "is something wrong?" and became "how long has this been true?" When that happened, I knew I wouldn't be confronting her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because whatever this was, it wasn't something to argue with. It was something to see clearly. There wasn't a single moment where I decided to stop caring. It didn't arrive like a switch or a sentence I told myself in the mirror. It happened the way structural failures usually do, quietly, after enough stress accumulates in the same place. One evening I was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, pretending to review drawings for work, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires hope. It assumes something can still be corrected if you push hard enough. What I felt instead was a kind of settled clarity. Not relief. Not devastation. Just understanding. I stopped asking why she was doing it. That question had already exhausted itself. Whatever explanation existed wouldn't restore anything I recognized. It wouldn't rewind time or make the numbers disappear. Answers wouldn't repair the marriage because the marriage wasn't broken in a way answers could reach. That was when my attention turned inward. I started thinking less like a husband and more like a steward of my own stability. What needed protecting? What needed documenting? What required patience? Outwardly, nothing changed. I still asked about her day. Still kissed her on the cheek when she came home. Still laughed at the same parts of the same shows. My voice stayed level. My routine stayed intact. Inside, though, a decision had already been made. I stopped imagining conversations. Stopped rehearsing confrontations I'd never have. I no longer pictured her confessing or apologizing or explaining herself in a way that made sense. Those scenes belonged to a version of me that believed repair was the goal. It wasn't. The goal became preservation. Financial, legal, personal. I updated copies of statements and saved them somewhere private. I reviewed account balances more carefully. I reread state guidelines late at night, not with urgency but with precision. I didn't rush because rushing would create noise. Noise attracts mistakes. There was something almost grounding about the process. When emotion threatened to surface, I redirected it into structure. Lists, dates, files. I slept fine. I ate normally. I went to work and performed exactly as expected. No one noticed a change because I wasn't acting wounded. I was acting prepared. Laura noticed nothing because I gave her nothing new to notice. That's the strange part people don't talk about. Betrayal doesn't always create chaos. Sometimes it creates focus. The kind that strips away distraction and leaves only essentials behind. By the time I accepted that the marriage was already over, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative, like closing a chapter that had finished writing itself while I wasn't looking. I didn't feel strong. I felt steady. And that was enough. After the internal break, I stopped interacting with the situation and started observing it. Observation is different. It doesn't carry expectations. It doesn't rush toward conclusions. It simply records what happens when no one thinks they're being watched. Patterns began to surface almost immediately. Not dramatic ones, practical ones. The kind you notice only when you're no longer invested in the outcome. Her delays weren't random. They clustered around specific days of the week. Tuesdays and Thursdays most often. Open house days rarely ran late. Client dinners always seemed to coincide with the same hotels appearing on the statements. Milwaukee trips followed a predictable rhythm, never more than one night, always returning mid-morning instead of early afternoon like before. Her stories didn't collapse outright. They frayed at the edges. Times didn't align. A meeting that supposedly ended at 9 matched a gas station charge at 11:47. A client dinner downtown coincided with a restaurant 40 minutes outside the city. Individually, each discrepancy was nothing. Together, they formed a consistent shape. Venmo became its own language. The payments appeared close to travel dates. Sometimes the day before, sometimes the morning after. Always modest amounts. Always clean. No notes. Nothing that would draw attention if someone glanced quickly. I started logging without emotion. Dates. Amounts. Locations. I didn't comment on anything. Didn't ask follow-up questions. Silence has a way of encouraging people to keep talking. Laura filled the space easily. She always had. What struck me most was how relaxed she was. There was no sense of being careful. No heightened awareness. That told me she believed the environment was stable. That belief made the patterns clearer, not harder to see. I noticed behavioral changes too. Subtle ones. How she showered immediately after coming home late. How her phone stayed face down more often. How she began mentioning certain clients repeatedly, as if rehearsing credibility. Repetition is usually a tell. I didn't correct her when details shifted. I didn't challenge timelines. I let the inconsistencies stand exactly as they were. Correction would have altered the data. Weeks passed like this. Quiet. Ordered. The facts accumulated without resistance. I never felt tempted to intervene because there was nothing left to intervene for. Observation had replaced hope completely. By then, I understood something important. Truth doesn't require pressure. Lies eventually arrange themselves into something visible if you let them continue uninterrupted. All I had to do was watch. The moment I scheduled the consultation, something shifted. Up until then, everything had lived inside the house, inside the marriage, inside my own head. Once I printed the statements and slid them into a plain folder, the situation stopped being emotional history and became documented fact. I drove to Chicago on a Wednesday morning. Took a half-day off work. Told Laura I had a project review that couldn't be moved. The drive was quiet. No music. Just traffic and time to think without needing conclusions. The lawyer's office was exactly what I expected. Neutral colors. Clean lines. No personality. When I laid the folder on the desk, I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. Dates spoke. Amounts spoke. Patterns spoke. The story assembled itself without commentary. He didn't ask why I hadn't confronted her. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked about account structures, property titles, length of marriage. Illinois statutes. Wisconsin overlap. Jurisdiction. What mattered wasn't betrayal. What mattered was exposure. Joint accounts became liabilities. Shared credit became risk. Every dollar spent after discovery carried weight. He explained it calmly, like someone describing weather patterns. Predictable. Impersonal. As he talked, I realized this wasn't escalation. It was translation. What had been personal confusion was now legal language. Timelines. Records. Definitions. The marriage stopped being a relationship and became a contract with consequences. When I left, I felt lighter. Not because anything was resolved, but because it was no longer ambiguous. Ambiguity drains energy. Structure restores it. From that point on, my actions were procedural. I followed advice. I documented without drama. I separated what needed separating quietly. Nothing visible changed at home. Laura still believed we were operating inside our private world. We weren't. Once a situation leaves the personal sphere, it doesn't come back. It moves forward under its own momentum. Systems take over. Rules apply evenly. Intentions stop mattering. By the time I crossed back into Wisconsin that afternoon, the outcome no longer felt uncertain. It felt scheduled. And I understood something clearly. Whatever this ended as, it wouldn't be decided in our kitchen. I chose the timing carefully. Not after an argument. Not after a long day. A quiet evening, midweek, when nothing felt charged. We ate dinner like usual. Plates rinsed. Lights low. The house settled into its familiar stillness. I sat across from her at the table and waited until she looked up on her own. "I need to show you something," I said. No edge in my voice. No warning. I slid my phone across the table and let it stop near her hand. The screen was already open. Venmo screenshots. Dates visible. Amounts clean and unedited. She didn't touch it at first. Her eyes moved, scanning without commitment, like she was deciding whether engaging would make it real. When she finally picked it up, she didn't ask where I got them. Her shoulders tightened. A small inhale through her nose. The kind people take when they know the direction a conversation is about to go and can't stop it. I didn't speak again. She started explaining immediately. Too quickly. Words stacking before the first sentence had time to land. She talked about stress. About pressure. About feeling invisible. About how it wasn't supposed to become anything. She said his name, Evan, like that would humanize the damage. A hotel bar. That was where it started. A coincidence. A conversation. A drink that went longer than planned. She said it happened, a few times. She said it never meant to hurt me. She said she didn't know how to stop. I listened the way you listen to a weather report. Information without engagement. When she mentioned the money, she hesitated. Said it was small. Said it didn't matter. Said it wasn't what it looked like. Shared money, she admitted. Ours. I nodded once. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. She asked if we could fix it. Asked if we could talk to someone. Asked if I was angry. I told her I wasn't. That seemed to unsettle her more than shouting would have. I said very little after that. Just enough to be precise. I told her I knew more than what was on the screen. That the details were documented. That the situation was no longer private. Her voice changed then. Softer. Defensive. Bargaining. But I wasn't her husband in that moment. I was someone already standing outside the life she was trying to explain. When the conversation ended, there was no slam, no collapse. Just quiet. She went upstairs alone. I stayed at the table until the house felt empty, even though it wasn't. After that night, I stopped guiding anything. There was nothing left to steer. Once the truth was spoken aloud, the situation began moving on its own, like a system released from manual control. Laura tried to regain footing through explanation. Not to me, but to the process. She framed things as emotional strain. Loneliness. Pressure from work. She said she felt cornered by expectations she never voiced. None of it was aggressive. It was careful, measured, as if tone alone could reshape facts. Mediation followed. Scheduled, postponed, rescheduled. Rooms with neutral walls and controlled temperatures where people spoke softly about outcomes instead of causes. I brought documents. She brought statements. Hers changed slightly each time, adjusting to what was already on record. Evidence doesn't argue. It waits. Bank statements contradicted timelines. Location data contradicted intent. Venmo records contradicted scale. Her own messages, meant to reassure, confirmed repetition. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. Just consistency closing in from every direction. At one point, she tried recording conversations, thinking context might help her case. They didn't. They revealed impatience, deflection, fatigue with maintaining alignment. Her words filled gaps she didn't realize existed. I stayed mostly silent, answered when required, provided what was asked. I didn't counter her claims emotionally because emotion wasn't the arena anymore. Procedure was. Friends asked how I was holding up. I said I was fine. That answer was accurate. I wasn't processing loss. I was witnessing conclusion. The system moved efficiently once momentum set in. Deadlines replaced discussions. Filings replaced apologies. The narrative stopped evolving and became fixed. What struck me was how little intervention it required from me. I didn't have to push. I didn't have to insist. Once the initial structure was in place, everything else followed naturally. Laura seemed surprised by that. She kept waiting for a moment to change direction. A pause. A reconsideration. Something human enough to interrupt the machinery. It never came. By the time we reached the final stages, there was no conflict left to resolve. Just outcomes to assign. The process didn't punish. It didn't reward. It simply concluded. And I let it. The decision came down on a Tuesday morning. I read it alone at the kitchen table, the same place where so many ordinary conversations had once happened. The language was clean and unemotional. No commentary. No judgment beyond allocation. The house went to me. The numbers supported it. Timing, contribution, continuity. A larger share of the assets followed for the same reasons. Spousal support was set, limited and defined, framed as transition rather than punishment. I felt nothing resembling triumph. There was no sense of having won because nothing about it felt competitive. The outcome didn't restore anything that had been lost. It simply acknowledged what already existed in writing and made it enforceable. Laura reacted quietly. No outburst. No collapse. Just a tired acceptance that arrived later than it should have. By then, the process had already moved past reaction. Her options were procedural, not emotional. We signed where instructed. Initialed margins. Confirmed addresses. The finality was almost understated. No one said congratulations. No one said sorry. The system doesn't offer either. Afterward, the house felt different. Not empty, exactly. Just settled. Like dust after something heavy has been moved and set down elsewhere. I walked through each room that night without nostalgia. The walls didn't ask questions. They didn't remember promises. They simply existed. I slept well. In the weeks that followed, the logistics completed themselves. Accounts closed. New ones opened. Automatic transfers rerouted. The administrative side of my life aligned cleanly again, which was the only metric that mattered. People assumed the ruling brought relief. That there was a moment of release or validation. There wasn't. What it brought was confirmation. The quiet understanding that the ending had been appropriate, contained, and final. Closure isn't a feeling. It's the absence of unfinished business. By the time everything was complete, there was nothing left to discuss, revisit, or defend. The story had reached its end without needing emphasis. And I was ready to leave it there. I don't live in Madison anymore. I left quietly, without announcing it as a turning point. A different city now. A smaller place. Fewer rooms, fewer reminders. The work is steady. The days are ordered. That matters more than it used to. I'm with someone new. Not because I needed replacement, but because I was available in a way I hadn't been before. There are no hidden payments. No timelines that need explaining. When she says where she's going, it aligns with where she ends up. That alignment feels almost extravagant now. Sometimes I think about that Venmo notification. Not with anger. Not even with bitterness. It was never really about the money. $60 wouldn't have changed anything by itself. It was just the first moment reality slipped through without asking permission. What followed wasn't destruction. It was clarification. I didn't lose a marriage. I exited something that had already stopped being mutual. The ending didn't require forgiveness or understanding. It required attention, restraint, and patience. People talk about betrayal as if it steals something from you. That wasn't my experience. What it took was illusion. What it returned was myself. Sometimes an ending isn't loss. It's the moment you finally stop living around a lie and start standing where you actually are.